Aaron. Aaron. Oh.
We are streaming. We are live.
We are streaming. We are live. We are.
Okay.
Wait, there's an echo.
It's off now. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this virtual theatrical release premiere of The Surrogate by Jeremy Hersh. My name is Eliza Hittman, and I am more than thrilled to be moderating this discussion with you guys, the audience. Thank you for tuning in for this chat. And I am joined with the filmmaker, Jeremy Hersh. A little bit about Jeremy. Jeremy Hersh is a New York-based filmmaker whose short film Actresses premiered at South by Southwest in 2015. And this is his first feature, The Surrogate, which was hailed a quietly accomplished debut by The Hollywood Reporter last week. Congratulations, Jeremy, on finally bringing this film to audiences. I know it may not be the path that you initially expected or wanted, but I'm happy that people get to see it regardless if they're sheltered in place or together in a theater. And it's important that we all connect through cinema at this very vulnerable moment in history. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So the film is incredibly complicated, and it deals with many sort of hot button ethical and moral ideas. And I'm just sort of curious I know for me personally, like a first feature is something, that generally spends a lot of time. I hate to use this phrase, but kind of gestating inside you. And I'm just curious, like, where the initial seeds for The Surrogate came from.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I think that part of it is like, as a kid, the only type of queer representation I would see on TV and stuff was these relationships between straight women and their gay male, like, best friends. And it was always in a really sort of flippant, one-dimensional way, the way it was portrayed. So I think I've wanted forever to do kind of my take on that relationship and try to add dimension to it, and, realism, and also, to look at kind of the darker, more problematic aspects that can exist in those relationships, those dynamics. And then I also think that going on the festival circuit with my first short, like my undergrad thesis film, I went to a bunch of queer festivals and saw that there's still this, like, audience of people who specifically want to see queer films. I mean, not still, there's more than ever. But that, so I kind of wanted to make something that would, like, shake up that crowd, because in a lot of ways that crowd was a little bit being, like, spoon-fed types of representation they wanted to see that, like, heroified the characters in a way that, again, is, like, one-dimensional.
I know, from conversations that we've had that you have spent sort of an extraordinary amount of time sensitively and trying to immerse yourself, in families that have children with Down syndrome and in different centers. And I was wondering if you could sort of tell the audience a little bit, what you told me about your sort of process in researching, this very sensitive topic that I think a lot of people might be, anxious about asking too many questions about the challenges.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there's only so much you can learn from reading about something, and I definitely that was a big part of my research as well. But I discovered this community center in Harlem called Gigi's Playhouse. It's like one branch of sort of an international network of these like community centers for people with Down syndrome. Yeah, I went there kind of just to like observe, and then you know, they were kind of like, great, like you're like, I was there as a volunteer. So they were like, okay, like, can you put this box over there? Like, can you take that kid to the bathroom? Like they were just happy to have, you know, like another set of hands, someone who seemed competent, I guess, which that was their first mistake, thinking that I was. Yeah, so I just kind of kept showing up and became friends with different people there, and just kind of, yeah, it just became kind of part of my routine. Yeah, and then I met this one specific family so the kid you see in the film is someone who I met him and his parents, and really hit it off with that family. And yeah.
And just
is that kind of what you meant?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, the relationship that you formed with them. And I'm curious how it changed your perception of what it means to parent a child with Down syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, I think like my preconceived notion was that
and ultimately how it changed the way you wrote the script.
Yeah. I think that yeah, I think my preconceived notion was, I mean, I had many, but some of the big ones were that that Down syndrome looks like one thing, that it's more homogenous than it is. Like it's a huge spectrum, and it's different for every person. And then, yeah, also just kind of that in many ways, like I overestimated the extent to which it affects a person's life. And then, you know, the thing that this is something that I read a lot about was the fact that you start to kind of look at it through this the lens of realizing that with disability in general, so much of the challenges are not really because of the disability, but they're because of the way the world is set up and structured. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, and I mean, you know, I also wanted in general with actors, like I want someone who's going to really take responsibility of a part and kind of help me like create the character. And in the case of Leon, you know, he improvised most of his dialogue. Like we kind of set up like the parameters of what the scene was going to be. So that was something where, like, you know, I had kind of guidelines in the script of what I thought the character would say. And then, you know, he kind of did what he felt, what he wanted to. Yeah, I can't think of any other really good examples of like, it's just, it's a big, yeah, I don't know.
In thinking about sort of the way that the world is structured and how it affects, you know, the life and the future that they might have, did that affect or inform the way that you know, worked with him on set in terms of, you know, did you go into it knowing you were going to do improvisation, or was that something you discovered as you went?
That was something, I mean, with all actors, I like improv, and I do also kind of say, like, you know, this is the blueprint, this is the words, but the words are not precious. You know, paraphrase anything you want. You know, don't go on like a tangent, but yeah, I encourage all actors to do that. So I think this is just an extension of that, and that was kind of how I expected to go about that. That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's more just like the fact that and I think this would be true with any, this is true, I guess, with any actor, is just that, like, I knew that that he would have to trust me and know me for it to work. You know what I mean? And yeah, and that we would have to take some time at the beginning of each shoot day for him to just get comfortable in the space. But again, yeah, I guess that's true of for anyone. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have anything more specific, but yeah, I mean, I that is like something that I learned is like in terms of, and I think that this is something that a lot of people will say, and people like that I was working with on set, like were kind of like, okay, like let's go over like the like tips and kind of protocol of like how to work with, how to talk with a child with Down syndrome, and I was like, just be just like act how you typically would act around anyone, any child, and you know, like be patient, but yeah, don't talk down to him, because that's something that yeah, like he like a lot of kids like won't respond well to someone talking down to them. But yeah, I think that's the that was like a kind of a something I learned, was that there's not that much to learn about like how to yeah, and that I think if you go back to kind of like the history of it, and this is kind of something like the character talks about in the film, but that like, you know, just a major issue was the false assumption that people with Down syndrome would not ever be able to learn how to read. So then they weren't taught to read, so then they couldn't read. So yeah.
I just want to also say to our audience who's watching, if you have questions and if our conversation is generating thoughts and ideas that you want to feedback on, please send them in. I'm going to check in a moment, but I want to ask Jeremy a couple more questions before we dive into everything that you want to know. Part of how Jeremy and I know each other is really through the theater world. And I, met Jeremy first. Maybe, he might have even introduced himself as an aspiring playwright. And I think that there's, a very confident writer behind this film, and obviously a confident director, but there's something about the structure and the way that the narrative unravels that feels very, grounded in kind of classical drama. And something, that could almost be written for the stage. And I'm sort of curious a little, Jeremy, for you, sort of how you navigate the difference, for you as a writer, between what you write that you want to live on the stage and what you write that you want to live on screen.
That's tough, because it is kind of mostly an intuitive thing. And I've really rarely ever changed my mind about, like, I normally, when I come up with a concept, I know, oh, this has to be a movie or this has to be a play. But yeah, I mean, it's like in a movie, I guess like something that I see myself doing, and that I do kind of think, I don't fully understand it, but I think that like in a movie, there's one person's point of view, right? And then in a play, yeah, you don't have that. It's like more of an objective like POV. And yeah, so I think that that's what's interesting about this story is like, I did start out when I was thinking about this, like I was saying kind of earlier, as like about these two people. And then it expanded from there, and I realized that like this character is the one who goes on the journey. So that's when it really became her film. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you structurally begin to sort of unravel the complexity of her decision making?
Well, and something else, like kind of going back to this is your previous things made me think about this of like, I like some of my favorite filmmakers, like I am interested in the idea of like what's theatrical, what's cinematic.
Question, but I did want to ask initially, but I ran it by Jeremy beforehand, and I couldn't tell if you wanted me to ask this, but who are the playwrights who inspire you, and who are the filmmakers who inspire you?
Well, when it comes to theater, Annie Baker is like my, she's my like idol. And then kind of going back to more classics, um, uh, Enemy of the People, I feel like is such a reference in everything I do. I think that's like such a like foundational thing. And then Adrienne Kennedy's work is big, and not in terms of formally what she was doing, but in terms of like what she was talking about. And yeah, who are the other? Well, so and in terms of the filmmaker who I was going to mention is Steve McQueen, because he is able to, and I'm specifically thinking about the movie Hunger. He's able to do this thing where, like in that film, there's like a 21-minute long single take that's just like a very simple shot, and yet it feels so cinematic to me. Like, so like, yeah, I think that's funny of like how sometimes like by leaning into something that's that is in some ways theatrical, like there's like the 10-minute long scenes in the Surrogate, um like yeah, I do think it's interesting, because I do think it's those kind of things, they feel differently than a play feels, and yet there's something in common. Christian Mungiu is a huge hero of mine. Your work is a huge inspiration to me. And Oscar Farhadi, that like his work was probably the biggest influence on this, like the movie A Separation. Yeah.
Okay, one of the things I'm just going to say, one of the things that I really love and respect and admire about Jeremy, and specifically in relationship to this film, was his prioritizing of casting a woman of color. And I'm just kind of curious, just sort of ethically for you, Jeremy, like why that's always been so critical for your work, even your early NYU shorts, and at this current moment when the Oscars are rethinking their Academy Awards, and we have kind of Broadway that's under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. I'm just you for me have always been sort of on the forefront of this conversation, and it's always been incredibly important to you. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about casting this role specifically of Jess, and your commitment to prioritizing casting people of color.
Well, I mean, as a general thing, it's like I would be stupid to not be like taking advantage of like how many amazing actors of color there are. Like, and in New York, like we have the theater community, which is like where I find every actor I want to work with is like someone who has done plays. But like specifically for this film, it wasn't just like in the casting process, it was always a part of the writing for this, and kind of wanting to look at sort of wanting to bring into the conversation like this theme of eugenics, wanting to kind of bring in the history of like American eugenics, and that, and I mean even in like something I didn't realize until like during the research was the fact that like one of the first things Hitler did was like forced sterilization of every German woman of African descent. And there weren't that many, but so yeah, I wanted to kind of like, for this character to be able to herself like be thinking about that without, it's not never like really said, but be thinking about that in terms of like the history of eugenics in America, which has like, has affected Black women maybe more than anyone. and yeah, and that's also why, like, you know, the other character, he's a Jew who, and his ancestors are, you know, Holocaust survivors or people who died in the Holocaust. So then he also has like a personal relationship to eugenics, and that manifests in a really different way. So yeah, so that was and then there came out of it, like, also, you know, kind of going back to this thing we're talking about, our relationships between gay men and straight women. You know, looking at the history of film in terms of like how Black women are like often portrayed in a way where well, and also I think in life, like, where Black women are kind of asked to do a lot of extra like emotional labor, and yeah, our and so that became something that was like, you know, it added, I think, to the journey that she goes on in terms of like being someone who is kind of feels like she can't, like, feels like she has to, um, you know, apologize for everything, and then, you know, kind of sheds that as the film goes on. Does that make sense? Yeah, and then it became a thing of like, you know, realizing like, yeah, again, that there's so many amazing Black actresses in New York to choose from. So that was a really exciting thing as well.
And talk a little bit about the casting process. I mean, I think it's been publicized, if I'm correct, that this is a micro budget movie. And I feel like it's such a triumph and miracle to, you know, be able to execute a film on, you know, on a small scale. And I know it wasn't easy for you to, you know, pull the financing together. And I think you did a kick, you know, the production process for you and the casting.
So our casting director is named Erica Hart, and she's someone who I met. She was just reminding me that we met the very first day of NYU. So I was saying recently to her, like, anytime that I wonder, like, was it worth it to go to NYU? What did I really get out of that experience or something? And then remembering, like, oh yeah, I met her. So it's like, you know, if I ever doubt that it was worth it or whatever, like, that silences that thought, because she's awesome, and we've been working together, yeah, since the my thesis film that she cast. And so, and in general, like, I kind of came to her with like, you know, this is going to be pretty easy, like, we're not going to do any auditions, like, we're just going to pull from like the theater people that we both know. And then, you know, she was like, um you know, kind of advocating for a more traditional audition process, or and you know, bringing in people that she specifically, not just like an open call, but people that she you know, thought were great, and it was just a question of like, who's the right person for this. So she brought in someone who I'd never I knew anything about. I'd never seen her before or met her, and she yeah, just really had like an essence that was similar to the character, and was just like a really like, we just hit it off interpersonally as well, right away.
And can you talk a little bit about sort of the staging of the film, and, you know, your interest in using long takes, and if you know, if you had a rehearsal process to help prepare. I know it's sometimes such a luxury in a film to have a rehearsal process, whereas when you do theater,
Yeah.
it's all about what evolves and comes out of the collaboration through rehearsal.
Right. Yeah, we didn't have much time. We had some time, and I just wanted to use that time for the actors to get to know each other, and hopefully build, yeah, I mean, they did build like a sense of you know, a backstory between them. So sometimes it was just people hanging out, and sometimes we would do improv. Um like, that was kind of imagining situations that are part of the timeline before the movie begins. And yeah, and then I mean on set it was really just it was very, we were trying um to kind of like arrange everything so that the actors had as much kind of control as possible. Um and so that's, you know, why it's handheld for everything, except the very final shot, um so that, you know, if the actor has an impulse, and you know, we wanted everything to be kind of 360, so it's not, like including the lights had to be kind of above, so that, you know, the actors really could kind of could decide the choreography, and if they had a sudden impulse, like the camera could move with them, as opposed to being like, oh well, unfortunately you're out of frame. um and Yeah, and I do think something, um like I guess I'm interested in like awkward silences, and in like including kind of moments that you don't often see in movies, like of the kind of like the entrances and exits that are sometimes, like, you know, often where we're taught like just cut into the middle of a scene and cut out before. But I sometimes like the kind of the moment of someone like awkwardly taking their coat off and stuff, and maybe that is like a theater influence, because in a play you usually have to like see an entrance. um but but yeah, I don't know, in a long take the actor is kind of deciding the pacing, and and I think there is something really cool about that. So even, you know, we ended up cutting quite a bit more than I thought we would, and we shot in a way where we were able to do that, where each time we were doing it, it was different enough that the camera was moving around enough that we could cut, um and even though it wasn't like traditional coverage. Does that make sense? And and but even within that, you know, we would try to do the entire scene all the way through, um because yeah, I just think like anytime you try to split it up, then the emotion, it's harder to get to that same place than if like you've done the entire scene.
I think your DP is with us. Hi, Mia.
Hi, Mia.
Joining us. Do you want to talk a little bit about your collaboration and your dialogue and what your pre-visualization process was like?
Well, we talked a lot about, wanting, to show the this sort of journey that the character goes on, and in terms of, like taking up more space, like learning to not apologize for herself, um, like that is mirrored in the fact that the camera is actually further away from on her, and she's like smaller in the frame, and then as the movie goes on it gets closer and closer, and she's taking up more space, I mean literally, of the frame. And then also that, the you know, early on it, like you can have it like a long take with the three main characters because they're very much on the same page, they're close. It's easy to just have a kind of a still, shot of the three of them, and then as it goes on it does require more cutting, and it does require the camera to kind of be like moving around to be able to catch them, because they're physically further apart, mirroring the fact that they're, you know, the relationship is like fracturing. um and yeah, I'm trying to think of like other, like what were our other references, Mia? We talked about the Dardennes, and that was like also like a script reference. Like that was something that Stephen Winter, the filmmaker, he early on was like, have you seen 2 Days One Night? And was like encouraging me to, because at that time, early on, when I was just writing the first draft, I was envisioning that the story would take place over like many months. And he really encouraged me, like, no, make it as tight of a window of time as possible. Like, make it in one day if you can. Which, I mean, it's not one day, but that was extremely helpful in realizing that like the tighter I could be with the timeline, the better. But yeah, Mia, Mia, can you say something in the chat? What?
Yeah, hard to do in a film about pregnancy. So, like,
yeah,
you know,
right, because they're, yeah,
over time, and
yeah.
She did chime in. Someone would like to know how you found your DP. So can you talk about how you and Mia Henry connected?
So that short, Actresses, my second short, we premiered it at Sundance, and Mia had a short there also that was called Superior, which she and the director just adapted into a feature. Like they're in post right now. And so I met Mia then at Sundance, and immediately like thought she was a delightful person and loved her work. But I didn't think we had a similar aesthetic, because that short, if you guys have seen it, is extremely stylized and like formalistic and surreal. It's not really realism, and so I loved that, but that's not the kind of thing that I want to make. And then I just kept like following her work and saw a short that she had shot directed by Adina Danziger, called Cheer Up Baby. And that had exactly the kind of style that I wanted. And then just talking to her about the fact that short was extremely low budget, and they didn't have much time, and I thought it looked great. And just the fact that the fact that she was able to pull that off, on a kind of similar shoestring that we were going to have, that gave me, I think, the confidence. Yeah. And then it also, when we first sat down, we would talk about different references and stuff. Like we do have a different sensibility, and so there was like a really productive push-pull. Like, it's like, I don't want like another person who thinks exactly the way I do as my DP. I want someone who there can be like a productive conversation that leads to like a greater result.
Mia is chiming in, and she wants to add that you guys just talk so much about the characters and the decision in each moment to influence the camera movement and the lens choice.
That's actually a really good point. That's another thing that like clinched.
You guys break down a script into beats?
What?
You guys break things down into beats because it's so character motivated, and I'm sure that in every new beat shift, the character moves or the camera moves in a way.
Yeah, I didn't do that. Like that's something that, I mean, no, I think we would talk about certain scenes in terms of beats, but a lot of times she would intuitively do that kind of in the moment. But then we did try one for kind of the climactic scene. We tried for a few takes a thing where I was inside this house looking at a monitor because they're outside, and on a walkie-talkie I was like, now pan, like, so we tried that like once, but for the most part, like we just had this foundation, like going back to when we were just casually talking about it before I even had the money raised, and we were just talking about working together. She just wanted to talk about the characters. Like for the first like several meetings we had, we like didn't get to anything visual at all, because she wanted to just understand the script and wanted to talk about like what it made her think of, and just our lives. So that's really cool. Like, I don't know how many DPs you would find that like are so just like obsessed with talking about character. So then I think that like we had such a foundation of and a trust that when it came down to like the individual beats and stuff, like for the most part I was a little bit like trusting her to like intuit those, and she did.
I'm going to just come to our chat over here. We have some comments. Lauren Minerath, she wants to know what inspired the scene with the restaurant that didn't have disability access. It's a great scene. It's an effective scene.
Thanks. Well, So yeah, that's a good question. Like when I first moved to New York, this is like another thing that I think inspired like the writing. And when I first moved to New York, I was really expecting like this kind of progressive paradise. And then, you know, you start to realize like in some ways it is very progressive, and like the community at NYU, that's like, you know, what I was really witnessing. And in a lot of ways it's not. And one of the ways that it's not is the way that we talk about disability, and the way in which disabled people are not only left out of a conversation, but are like you know, actively prohibited. So, and just the fact that it's a city where there's stairs everywhere, and like to this day, you know, the subway is not accessible. So yeah, that was something that really made me angry. Like, yeah, like, and still does. But that, yeah, when I first moved to New York, like that was like a huge, it was a surprise to me, like just to see that, when there is a specific restaurant, and that, because there's a lot of restaurants where like, and often they'll have like a different entrance that like you have to like go like 2 blocks away to get into like the building, and then go in up an elevator, and then like, you know, to get in. So it technically is accessible, but it's like, it's really not. But yeah, that the restaurant that like most inspired that is actually closed. So I feel like I can say the name of it. Should I? It was the Roebling Tea Room in Williamsburg. So do you know that where that there's like these huge stairs, yeah, to get in.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, we have a comment and a question from Jordan Hurwitz. The movie felt beautifully unburdened by plot. How did you break the story for the movie? How did you figure out where to drop us in on the date with Jess, and where to end without spoiling anything?
Thank you, Jordan. I don't ever know, Eliza, like what the term breaking story means. Like, what does that mean?
I don't know, actually.
People always say that.
Yeah.
But I guess like what?
Maybe I haven't worked enough in TV, but when you sit down to break the story, you're kind of like trying to find, you know, you're just brainstorming essentially.
Yeah. To like, yeah, how did I decide? Well, I mean, like I we're sort of talking about this in terms of the timeline. So I did basically just try to think, you know, what was the latest moment that I could drop the viewer in, and also how could I like show the relationship in the story without like telling. So I mean, I'm in a lot of ways like I'm extremely dialogue focused, but I do try to not have exposition be through dialogue. So yeah, so you know, then I'm like, okay, well, what's like a visual thing? Her getting the pregnancy test, blah blah blah, you know, that. And so yeah, I was trying to kind of get us in as late as possible, and then in terms of where we end, it's like I didn't think that. I mean, I assume like most of you, have you seen the film? Like, do you know how it ends?
I think your audience has seen the movie here.
Yeah. Well, so it's like I just didn't feel like originally the script ended. The final scene was something that was added kind of late in the script process, soon before we shot, and but I just didn't feel like we needed to see the abortion itself, and that it was just kind of like, you know, when she's made the decision, it's like, you know, we know what she's going to do, and kind of that's that. And then I realized like, well, I wanted to make it very clear. Like I try to not be didactic in general, but one thing that I want to be somewhat didactic about is that like she's not making a bad decision. She's not going to regret this. Like it's not like a sad ending where like, oh, she decides to have the abortion. Like that's terrible. Like it's like, no. So I wanted it to be, and that's I guess also why I didn't feel like I needed to show the, you know, like a scene where she's having the termination, and it's like uncomfortable. So it's like, you know, we're something like 6 weeks after, 2 months after. I mean, it's kind of unclear what the time that elapses between the penultimate scene and the final scene, but in my mind it was like 2 months after, and like she's fine. Like, not, it's not like, oh, all her problems are solved or anything like that, but like she's gonna be okay. Yeah, and it's not like she's not like sitting there regretting anything. Yeah, I don't know, Jordan, does that answer what you were curious about?
We have a comment from Tony Gapastioni. Congratulations, Jeremy. Really happy to have gotten connected to this project. Talk about your creative choice, RE Music.
Oh, thanks, Tony. He's one of our EPs, actually, who we met through Kickstarter. Yeah, it's just, so I mean, this is something that I'm kind of inspired by Christian Mungiu, the Romanian filmmaker who doesn't use music in his movies either. And yeah, I just think, like, you know, it's honestly, it's what part of it is that it's so hard to do well, that, like, and if it's not done perfectly well, I think then it takes me out of the film. It makes me think the filmmaker is yeah, like telling me what to feel. And I mean, I love when people have really different interpretations of things. Like, sometimes people will think my work is like not funny at all. Sometimes people will think it's really funny. I mean, that's a little bit more towards my previous shorts than this, but still. And I just think that, yeah, like I don't see a need for it. And if I've been able to be successful with it, honestly, it's like a way to save money, like to not have to pay a composer like on a micro budget film. And but it's not something I just think it's like not how I think. Does that make sense? Like, it's not organic to me. It's not like my brain doesn't work in a way, like, I love music in general, but it's just not something that comes easily to me of like how I would use it. And yeah, does that answer that?
We have a question from Micah Van Hove. He would like to know what attracts you to realism as a stylistic tenet.
Oh, that's interesting, because yeah, of course, realism is just like another style. It's not any more real.
Quotes. He didn't put it in quotes. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no. But I think it's an interesting thing, and it's interesting, like, in terms of like what in your work, like that some of the lighting choices in beach rats, like, I think that's a really cool thing where when you first watch it, I didn't even think about it, and then you realize, like, oh yeah, that is a little bit like stylized, but it feels just as real. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like, it's the kind of, again, it's like, it's the thing that comes naturally to me, is that style. And like, I guess, and also as a viewer, like, I love things that are like very much not like the two playwrights, I guess, that are like living playwrights that I love, Adrienne Kennedy and Annie Baker. Like, Annie Baker, her work is like, for the most part, extremely realism, and then Adrienne Kennedy, for the most part, her work is extremely surreal. So I'm a little bit like, what I'm drawn to is stuff that's like not middle of the road. And yeah, I don't know, it's just like the kind of stuff that I like, and the kind of acting that I like, and it's the kind of thing that I think I know how to do. It's just yeah.
Would you say that?
Yeah, no, I mean,
would you say that the kind of the stylistic choices of the camera, like a handheld character motivated camera, this sort of top lighting, the lack of non-diegetic music, do you feel like those are all things, a part of your approach that you will carry with you to the next process? Do you feel like those ideas are what create your version of realism?
Yeah.
Is there anything that we're missing that in the mise en scène that you feel you know, is consistent to your approach?
No, I mean, I think like a big thing is the handheld and the lack of non-diegetic music, right? I always forget which is yeah, I think those are big things. And I mean, I always I want to challenge myself and to do different things. And there is, you know, I do have this script that I'm starting to kind of develop, that it actually might have some like non-diegetic music in it. So, you know, it's like I do want to always try to be like breaking my own rules and try to to see what works and stuff. But I'm a little bit more, I guess, like in the next two scripts that are in my head, they're actually a little bit more like I'm trying to challenge myself by like one of them is extremely autobiographical, and I'm trying with that one to really lean into comedy and to make it like to try to, so in some ways that one might I might make choices that are a little bit like more for like comedy and less towards realism. So that's something, but that's a bit more like a style of writing and so that's trying to kind of have that be the like independent variable, everything else be kind of a control group. And then the other one, oh wait, can you still hear me?
You froze, Jeremy.
Did you lose me?
You're freezing a little bit and breaking up. Oh, there you are.
How about now? Is this good?
Yeah.
So what was the last thing you heard me say? Sorry.
I don't know. I got confused for a second. Go back. Just go back. It just broke up the last.
Yeah. So one of the things is I'm going to try to lean into comedy, but I'm going to try to keep, I think, a lot of other things that I do feel like kind of work in my style, try to keep those the same. And then the other one actually has, it's based on real life events. So there's that element of it that's something new for me. And there's also some violence in it. So working with that type of choreographer, that will be, I think, really challenging for me. So therefore I'm like, I want everything else pretty much to be as like, you know, what I'm used to as possible.
I'm just looking through Lauren Lederman. She would love to hear more about your research process and how the story unfolded from that, or vice versa. You sort of touched upon that a little bit.
Yeah.
Did you do extensive research into surrogacy and talk to people?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was something, and like there's this, if anyone's interested, we have also an interview that I did with or like a talk kind of that I did with this woman who I met online, who and we became friends like in the process of her telling me about her life. So yeah, we talked a lot about that and in that other thing. But yeah, I mean, again, it's like it does kind of mirror what I was talking about with that family, Leon's family, is that, you know, I read as much as I could and talked to, you know, people on the phone and stuff, but like actually getting to know this person and hang out with her. And like, I like stayed with her and her family just like for fun. That, yeah, I think that was like extremely useful in just terms of like understanding like her as a human, in a way that, yeah, you can't really from just reading. And I also, yeah, I tried to talk to, I talked to a reproductive psychiatrist, like I'm trying to think of what her, yeah, like a psychologist with a PhD whose specialty is in reproductive technology and like reproductive trauma. I talked to a lot of different genetic counselors whose job is to talk to people and kind of like almost like a social worker, guide them through their options when they have gotten kind of an unexpected prenatal test result. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what else can I say about the research?
Did you, as you were writing the script, her ultimate decision would be.
Oh yeah, that I knew, just because I didn't want in any way the film to be able to be seen as like a pro-life movie, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that like even when she's
an anti-choice movie.
What?
Anti-choice movie.
Yes. No. Thank you. Yeah. And but in terms of
knowing her decision,
I did. Yeah. And I mean, I think like I started from a place of I had a kind of a general idea of what I envisioned the film to be, and was extremely ignorant on a lot of the different stuff in the film, and then did a bunch of research, wrote the first draft of the film, and then really my writing process, a lot of it was talking with someone and then revising the script based on what they had said. And then the really one really helpful thing was getting people such as that surrogate or this family I'm talking about, or whatever, to read the script and tell me like what feels inaccurate, what would you add. So I found for the most part notes from people who are not filmmakers but who have some kind of knowledge in what I was trying to write about. I found that to be that was the most helpful notes that I got. And sometimes they would give like dramaturgical notes on the structure that had nothing to do with their expertise. That was really helpful, because they were someone who had liked movies.
I'm just seeing if we have anything else in here we want to tackle. I don't know. I think, for me, what I love about the movie, are you looking through the chat, or are you?
No, just someone, my roommate texted me saying that the last day to vote, to mail in an absentee ballot is Tuesday. So I feel like that's worth mentioning.
Sounds good. I mean, I think, what for me is effective about the film is that on the one hand, I'm sort of rooting for Jess to have total autonomy and ownership over this decision-making process, but then sort of at the same time as a parent, and knowing how difficult it is as a parent, and, feeling, that the information swirling around her, she should, ultimately listen to. And not wanting her to be bound to the complexity of this dynamic as a parent. And being a parent in some ways is, and a complicated relationship that she has with her friends. And I think that that's palpable throughout the film and makes for an exciting and engaging tension. And I think that you are able to, weave all of these dynamics between race and gender, and issues about, disability, in a way that, and balance them in a way that's, ultimately subversive and unique. So I'm just sort of saying congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wind down and see if there's any other questions last minute that you, our audience, thank you for being here, want to chime in and ask. Jeremy, do you want to just briefly, in addition to telling and reminding everyone to vote, which is important, just tell anyone who maybe didn't see the film sort of where they can catch it from here on, and what your hope is for the life of it, and to spread the word?
You can go to the Monument website, or you can find me on social media. I'm at Jeremy Hersh, the movie, on Instagram and on Twitter. The movie is at the Surrogate movie on Instagram, and you can go to Monument Releasing, and the links in all of our bios. You should also, if you haven't seen Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Eliza's recent film that won the Silver Bear at the Berlinale this year, you absolutely must. And that is on Apple TV store, I think. Yeah, you can get that. And Google it. Yeah.
So we have a couple more from the Park Chan family. Bravo, Jeremy. Happy to have been involved in this amazing project.
Is that David? Thanks.
Are there any special thanks you want to give to people who might have worked on the film that might be watching right now?
I mean, they all.
Are they
too many to name? I mean, I think Jasmine sent me like a nice like break a leg message just before this. So hi, Jasmine. Thanks for everything. They all know who they are, and they know I love them, and that it's it's like the film is their film just as much as it is mine.
Marlene Haddad says, amazing film. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow.
I'm reading without my glasses. Any last words?
Yeah, the other thing is there's a couple organizations that we're trying to encourage people to donate to if they can, or just spread the word about. But yeah, donate if you can. The Emergency Release Fund, that's also the name of their website, is emergencyreleasefund.org, and their Instagram is that. And it's a place, it's a bail fund that historically has been for trans people, and now they're kind of opening it up for all queer people, because there's like a huge, I mean, I think we all know that there's a really urgent need for that. There's an organization called Asada's Daughters that you can also find on Instagram, and that's a really cool Black feminist organization in Chicago that's kind of centered around teaching like young Black people to be activists, basically, like teenagers and younger, and providing like other resources to them. So donate to them. Follow me on Instagram, and I'm posting other places that like your money should be going to right now. I think that's about it. Thank you so much. What?
One last question. Do you have any advice for anybody out there who might be thinking about, making a micro budget first feature? Any last words of wisdom?
That's tough. Yeah. I mean, normally what my advice is just to go see plays, which you can't right now, because that's where I found that's where I found the vast majority of my cast, and that's where you can find like amazing actors who often will want to be in movies. So I don't. What would you say, Eliza? Because your first feature is like the example of like an amazing movie that was made on like even like a extreme way less of a shoestring than ours was.
Right, practically, so that you know that you have access to everything that's on the page.
I guess one thing that I've kind of learned during this process is like I thought of myself before this as like not a producer. I was like, I'm just a creative, like I can't figure that out, and then realized like, no, you can be your own producer, and everything that is producing is a task that anyone can learn how to do, and often for a first micro budget feature, you actually have to be your own advocate, and like there's nothing more convincing than like the person who the story came from herself, like trying to get people to be also excited about it. So yeah.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you, everybody. I hope you are safe, and thank you for joining us tonight for this discussion about Jeremy Hersh's debut feature film, The Surrogate. Thank you.
Thanks so much.